Welcome to the Microcast, the short-form podcast from Microcosm Coaching, where we break down the science, strategy, and psychology behind smarter endurance training. Each week, we tackle a key concept in running, training, or recovery, and we give you practical tools you can apply right away, whether you're building back, leveling up, or chasing down a big goal. We keep it short, evidence-based, and grounded in real coaching experience. No hype, no fluff, just actionable insights to help you train sustainably and perform at your best. Let's get into it.
I'm James Nance, a running and cycling coach based out of Fort Collins, Colorado. I used to teach college mathematics, and I absolutely loved connecting with all the students, forming those relationships, seeing them learn and grow. And I no longer teach, but I kind of missed that connection component. I really enjoy working with athletes who are maybe pursuing multiple sports or are pursuing a big goal in one sport, but still want to stay in touch with their other disciplines, whether that's cycling or skiing or swimming or whatever else. I really enjoy helping athletes balance chasing a big goal in one discipline while doing things that they still really enjoy and find valuable. I love coaching athletes of any age or chasing any discipline, whether that's a road 5K or a marathon, or a cyclist who just wants to show up and hang on a little longer during the group rides on the weekends, or whether they're training for some big endurance ride, a Grand Fondo or something like that. I really enjoy working with athletes who are maybe stuck in an injury cycle, athletes who are struggling or have struggled with relative energy deficiency in sport, RED-S, maybe some disordered eating, maybe some exercise dependency. I've dealt with all that stuff myself and still struggle with it every now and then, so I feel like I can relate a little more easily to those athletes. I understand what they're going through. The problems I solve best are the ones where maybe someone's overtraining, and identifying how we can right the ship, ease off the gas a little bit in a way that still feels like they're not going from 100 miles an hour to zero all at once. Trying to take one baby step each week or each month even, just to kind of like slowly taper things back. So if we can find one thing to tweak each week or each couple of weeks and just slowly work away, that seems to be a really impactful way to approach some of these problems. My hot take is that I don't enable any of the color coding of workouts in Training Peaks. I feel like seeing those colors, it assigns like bad to red and not good enough to yellow. And I really want to get away from that mindset, because sometimes taking a red day or skipping a workout could be you perfectly executing your training plan. If you didn't sleep well at all last night, stressing over, a big presentation at work, you're exhausted the next morning, instead of like slogging through a tough workout, you take the rest day. And that's exactly what I would want to see as a coach. What sets me apart as a coach is that I care really deeply about the athletes that I coach. They're not just a name in my Training Peaks log. I really want to get to know them as human beings. Like, what'd you do this weekend? How was that ski trip? You mentioned you had an interview for this job coming up. How's that going? I miss those connections with my students as a teacher, and I'm kind of striving for those same connections with my athletes. I help multi-sport athletes chase big goals and dreams while staying in touch with their athletic identity, whether that's running and then going on that group ride on the weekends, or doing some downhill skiing on the weekends, or whatever else that they're able to do that expresses themselves as an athlete. I help them retain that in their athletic journey.
Okay, new idea for how I awkwardly intro the podcast.
What's the intro idea?
Well, because I'm always right before you press record having to finish a snack, I can just talk about whatever snack I finished as a means of normalizing how much you have to eat when you're a runner. Today's choice is dill pickle Pringles.
Yes.
The microcast, brought to you by gas station potato chips.
And let me tell you, these are some of my favorite gas station chips here.
That's really right now. Okay, so my top three. This is important. Probably going to be, I love Dots pretzels. Dots pretzels. That's my favorite chip.
Okay, all right.
And I do consider a pretzel a chip. A hot dog is not a sandwich. Pretzel is a chip. Don't at me. Second is going to be the Simply Cheetos Puffs. This is so deranged, but you know, the bullshit, like, healthy version of Cheetos that is, like, absolutely not healthier, but it's in a white bag with a green font, so you're like, "Ooh, healthy," and they're baked, but it's still a Cheeto, just larger. Love those. Shout out to Simply Cheetos Puffs. And then, number 3 might be dill pickle
So
chips.
basically what we're hoping for is a General Mills sponsorship for
That's
this
what I'm angling for. I want to be
podcast.
sponsored by the potato lobby.
One of my athletes actually had mentioned enjoying some of those Cheetos.
They're
And
good.
I've actually never had Cheetos before, but I had remembered that you like them. So I was
Mhm.
like, no, it's all good that you like those because Zoe likes them.
And I'm a diet goddess.
And sometimes we know that our training is limited by our ability to continue to fuel.
Not mine, because I am a bottomless pit.
Well, to be honest, processed foods help us kind of overcome some of those limitations
Ooh.
at times.
It's almost like you're previewing a little bit of what we're going to talk about today.
I know, but it makes sense.
It does.
We've been at gas stations a lot lately because
A very normal life.
We're normal. We've been traveling back and forth to Fruta
Yeah.
to do some training, and that involves quite a lot of driving and
Yeah.
a lot of stops at the gas station to make sure we have plenty of fuel.
Glycogen on board. Yeah, I'm training for the UTMB Chianti 123K again, the one that we
Yes.
did last year and was minorly disastrous.
6 weeks away now.
6 weeks away. So I'm in the peak of training, more or less. I did like 3 consecutive 100-mile weeks, hence the Pringles. And I've been driving to the desert every weekend to get on trail because I might go insane having to do 8 to 9 hours of volume on the roads in winter in Carbondale.
You don't like to do 3 hours on a 5-mile dirt road segment?
I did a 4-hour run where I just ran the Carbondale circulator route for like 4 hours.
That is a
And I
6-mile
felt
loop.
insane. I felt insane.
That's a little insane.
Yeah. I was like, I kept running by, like on Main Street, running by all these people eating brunch. And I was just like,
People were
questioning my
probably
choices.
wondering why you didn't have something better to do on a Saturday. And I think our listeners
wonder that
too
myself.
might be wondering, thinking maybe you should consider some hobbies.
well, okay. I love training. Training is one of my top hobbies.
Yeah.
So I'm really going for it this time of year. I'm loving it. I think there's always like a part of me that's like, okay, recognizing that what I'm doing is higher volume. It's a lot by any measure. This is only my second year of doing 100-mile training weeks. You should go back and listen to the podcast we did probably about a year ago where I talk about running my first ever 100-mile training week.
Yeah.
I still think it is so rude that I didn't immediately become a superhero when I ran a 100-mile training week. But I really do like running a lot. Sometimes that results in a flashy number. Most of the time it does not. But right now I'm really vibing with this higher volume of training and listening to my body and making sure I'm, you know, really dialed, particularly on the recovery. And for me, that means bringing a lot more intention to my nutrition, making sure I'm eating enough, to my recovery, being really diligent about sleep, trying to manage stress, trying to run my work life in a way that meshes well with training.
Yeah. Isn't that a fun part of the equation? I mean, I feel like that's a tough thing to do, and something that and one of my athletes actually mentioned to me in a call this week was they really sent up the signals for them, what you said on last week's podcast, where you're like, when I'm running a 100-mile week, the 100-mile week kind of forces me to basically just focus on the things that I have to do, and it helps me eliminate all those extras that I really
Yes.
didn't need all along, and I definitely don't have space for when I'm doing training like this.
I mean, we talk about this all the time, but the goals you pick should help you live the kind of life you want to live.
Yeah.
I find that when I'm training the way I need to train for the goals I've selected, I feel more in my values.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really cool, right? And that's the whole thing about goal selection that I think is often overlooked, is that folks think about, oh, what goal would be cool?
Yeah.
What goal would get me the most likes? What would be that, produce the best feeling outcome
Yeah.
when I get to shout out about it
Or I
on
need a
Strava?
Western States like lottery thing, or like doing it for all these extraneous reasons that ultimately aren't fulfilling enough to propel the level of training that people need to do to reach their potential.
I really do think to continue to sustain the process year over year and to literally do kind of what it takes to become excellent at this, which is, as we know, it's at least a decade of consistent training. In order to do that, we have to pick goals that do reflect our values back to us, are rooted in the bigger picture, the bigger vision for who we want to become. And also kind of they do force us to actively pursue that better version of ourselves. And
Yeah.
one of those things for you is quite honestly, setting better boundaries,
Yep.
doing less,
Yep.
knowing what is the, living into your conditions of enoughness,
Check.
which was a really cool thing that you brought up on the last podcast. And I think like a great goal kind of like asks us to really make an effort to become that higher version of ourselves, that
Yeah.
thing that we're like aspiring to do, but we're sometimes too scared or afraid of how that might look to other people.
It's weird because I always like with the athletes that I coach and when we're talking on our meetings, on our deep dives, getting really clear and curious about like what does like excellence look like to you, if that's a value? What does living in your values look like to you? And for me, my version of doing that, I feel like looks kind of nutso.
Right.
And I think that it's helped me become more comfortable with accepting like I like doing a higher volume of training. There are times in my life where that takes up more bandwidth than, other creative projects that I have.
Well, let me grab that idea for a minute before we dive into the rest of the podcast, because this is something we talked a lot about over the weekend, where when we had some downtime after our long run on Saturday, and we are really talking about like, oh, the fact that you just love to be out there all day
100%.
running.
Love it.
And one of the things that I was really thinking about in my training over the weekend was like distilling my why down to the purest, most simple why possible.
Yeah.
And that like the idea of like when we're running, the entire point is just to be running
Yeah.
and nothing else.
Right.
Anything else is an outcome. How it makes me feel is an outcome. The possible PRs that I might get or signs of progress are outcomes. The metrics that the workout derives that my coach can analyze are outcomes, and so on and so forth. But like what I think is so unique and often I thought was like very limited in the past about your why. And now I'm kind of like full circle, like, ooh, maybe
I was
Zoe
right.
had this
Oh my
right
God.
the whole time, was like, the point is just to run.
My why has always, and it's honestly been something I feel vulnerable about because I feel like it doesn't sound like deep
Right,
or
it's not like
epic or like no one's ever going to make a 3-part documentary about my why, because my why is just I fucking love running.
right.
That is it. End of sentence.
Well, and I think that is a real difference between you and me. Like, I think I like the challenge more than I like the actual running.
Yeah.
I like the progress more than I like the actual running. I like the competition and being in the races more than I like the actual running. And I've been thinking a lot about that because as I also try to adopt higher volume training, and I am inevitably spending more time running than I think I prefer, or that like I feel like I'm hitting my preference
Then feels like
ceiling.
natural.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Like, because as I explained to you, like I have other interests and
Yeah.
things that I like to do
I know
on
it
the
makes me
weekends.
such a boring person. I'm extremely interesting. I have a robust creative life.
No, you do, but you
I
do.
have a close relationship with our pet
Yes. And
and friends.
well, let's get back to the main point here. I think those things are nice. But the point is, I think one of the reasons why I feel like your disposition naturally leads you to these bigger weeks is that like you're kind of just one with your run the whole
Absolutely.
time. And there's something to that
Yeah.
that I am trying to embody a little bit more in my own training. And quite honestly, I feel like it's something that that I need a little in order to maybe break
You
through.
need some big dumb Zoe energy.
Well, it's not dumb. I think it's actually it's really
Zen.
smart to not overthink things. Like, we have a whole podcast on not overcomplicating your training, right? And
It's
that's
true.
like one of our most listened to
It's our
podcasts.
second most listened to of all time. Shout out to my overthinkers.
Right, like thousands of downloads, and that's really cool because we're all overthinkers, right? Like, are we
Welcome.
overthinking? Am I overthinking my why
I think so.
sometimes? Like, I could be.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I've just been really thinking about that. And I think it does have, something to do with the topics today when we talk about, fueling,
Yeah.
when we talk about high carb, when we talk about even accountability and defensiveness within the space of our training, which we got a listener question about.
Yeah.
I think the overthinking sometimes clouds us and takes away from just being there with the running, and everything else. We're kind of just like assigning more stuff to our runs than maybe is necessary at times. As much as I think it is important to like want to progress and do things because it can create growth, and you're picking goals that help change who you are as a person. And it's really the process of pursuing those goals that do that. But at the same time, if we just let it happen
Yeah.
without thinking too much about it, maybe we get less in our own way and we're able to enjoy more and progress more.
100%. Well, with that, maybe we can pivot to the sort of the meat of our episode here, the vegan meat, as us anemic plant-based athletes know and love.
Okay.
First is a call for hot or nots. We are out. We have scraped the bottom of the barrel. So if you have something that you want us to give a hot take on, and I actually Googled the definition of a hot take.
Yes.
And it was a quick thought based primarily in opinion, usually meant to generate attention, which fair.
So we're not great at those hot takes.
We're not great at those
because
we like science.
Too much science.
We are overthinkers. So if you want to hear us overthink something, send us your topics that you want to hear us overthink about. Comment, also leave us a review. That really does help the algorithm, like help us find people so that, other folks are learning about the joys of eating carbohydrates relative to like whatever, XYZ bro influencer is putting out there today. Share with a friend, a loved one, a frenemy, a clergyman, whoever in your life needs microcosm coaching.
Yeah. Help us build the community.
Help us build the community. And speaking of, I'm excited about this listener question because it's from a coach outside of our organization. But love that we're putting something out there that speaks to other like colleagues in the space. That makes me feel like we're doing at least something right. And B, I love a question that selfishly I get to benefit from because I have to think about and write through it and do research and whatnot.
All right. So the question is, I have an athlete who told me at the start of our work together that they wanted accountability, real feedback, not just cheerleading. But every time I flag something, they push back or explain why this time was different. I've started softening my feedback or just not saying anything because I don't want every interaction to feel like a confrontation. But then I wonder if I'm actually doing my job. How do you balance holding athletes accountable with not making them dread hearing from you? Oh my God.
I love this.
This is the artistry of coaching.
This is the art where again, there's nothing on PubMed that's like 9 evidence-based ways to be a good human. And this is where the being a human, like no AI can step in and do this for you. But what's worth recognizing is that a lot of times what humans ask for and what they can receive, what they're really able to receive can be really different things. And as coaches, we're not here to be the police. It's not our job to correct every workout. Our primary job is pattern recognition, knowing when something is noise versus signal. We talk so much about coaching our athletes towards greater autonomy and agency and recognizing the signal and the noise of their training. And we have to train ourselves to do the same thing, even with emotional data.
Right. No, totally. And I think that is one of the hard things when you're dealing with like human to human connection and interaction. Often our emotions and our feelings in a moment about something can create a lot of noise and lead to a lot of like reactionary forces. both for the coach and the athlete,
Yeah.
right? So like it's important if you're a coach who's listening to this. I think one of the things that I consistently ask myself is like, does this feedback serve the athlete
Right.
or does it serve my emotional state? Does it serve my emotions around this? Does it make
Mm.
me feel better?
And what that means is like instead of giving someone potentially like holding them accountable, you soften your feedback so that you feel comfortable
Right.
rather than like this person is paying me to hold them accountable. That they said that's what they want. And you're speaking or interacting primarily from that place of wanting to keep yourself feeling safe rather than putting the primacy on what does this athlete need right now.
Right. So like I think the person who asked this question may feel or is starting to feel some kind of an emotional response around their feedback not being met with openness, and
Yeah.
for it, that feedback that they feel is genuine, 100% honest, you know recognizing those patterns and kind of trying to get to the core of things. And every coach has been there, right? But like that softening of the feedback
Right.
as a result of not
And
having the right reaction from the athlete, means you're starting to tailor your coaching to your emotional state
right.
rather than what actually serves the athlete.
And you should calibrate your delivery to what any given human, athlete, client, whatever terminology feels best for you can actually use. And that doesn't mean you need to be exactly the same with every single athlete. That's not good coaching. But
Right.
again, putting the emphasis on the client and not your feelings in that scenario. I also
So
think one point is that, and I'm going to prove my own point here, the best coaching isn't the most coaching.
right.
You need to save your accountability capital for when it counts. If you're getting into athletes like training log, email DMs every time something is slightly off, that's going to make it really hard for them to actually understand. I mean, really anything in
Yeah.
either direction. It's going to make them feel like they're never doing anything right. And that's going to lead to a feeling of like hypervigilance and burnout. And this is something I'm always trying to improve upon in my own coaching is threading that needle between showing up when it counts and when the athlete can benefit from it and not overperforming coaching. Because as a woman and as a younger person, younger than many of my clients, not because of my clients, because of my own Zoe shit that I bring from living and breathing in, this world in the year of our Lord 2026, feel a self-imposed pressure to like be coach, to like know all the science and to just like be a human version of PubMed and primarily understanding or thinking that my primary value is in knowing things and like being able to like recite the Krebs cycle. But for many athletes, like they don't care if you can recite the Krebs cycle. You probably should have a understanding of the Krebs cycle while we're at it. But that emotional intelligence is what makes that underlying intelligence actually matter.
Well,
Otherwise, you're just yelling about cell metabolism.
and again, I think that's really the main point, right? So like it may actually serve the athlete to not give them challenging feedback that you view as, accountability coaching. It may serve them to not give that feedback. Maybe they're not in a place where they can receive that. I think one of the things that I try to do as a coach, and this has been a real work in progress for me, is trying to use more wise speech
Mm,
when I'm in a situation where I feel like the athlete may not be hearing me or might be acting defensively around something. Like, for example, like, are you open to my feedback right
mm,
now? Are you open to me sharing a pattern
I
that
love that.
I'm recognizing in your training? Because then you can gauge, like, if they're not really open to it, then what serves the athlete is just being okay with that and
Yeah.
leaving it there, and going on to the next session. But if they are open, then, you can share. And the way we communicate with every athlete is gonna be somewhat different, because, every person is different and responds to things differently. So that kind of nuance is the artistry that exists in coaching. It's much harder for newer coaches, but if you're 10 years down the line in this, it's going to feel a lot more normal. And I would also, say, like, a lot of this goes for the athlete too.
Yes, absolutely.
So we really,
it's a relationship.
Right.
The way I like to phrase it is that the athlete is the CEO. I'm the consultant.
yeah. And I like that. The way I think about it is it's a two-way street relationship, or a co-authorship.
Yes.
So, if you're the athlete and you've asked for accountability, but you're getting defensive when you receive feedback, that might be something that you need to sit with and take a step back and ask yourself, what is it about this information that's making me close down, be defensive, or feel like I need to be right, unable to learn? Like I really look at a clear distinction between two states. Like we have a state of openness and we have a state of closedness, and you can't occupy both states at once. You're either open or you're closed.
Yeah.
And when you're closed, you're committed to being right, you're defensive. And when you're open, you're more curious, you're committed to learning. It's really a very simple dichotomy there. But it can be very helpful for athletes and coaches to think about things in very simple terms like that.
Yeah.
Am I committed to learning in this moment, or am I committed to being right about how I feel about something?
And it doesn't have to be like your way of being. It can just be like, I had a really hard day at work. Today's not the day.
Well,
like,
and
I don't need you to come in hot in my log with like a bunch of stuff about my IF when like I was at the vet all day and like my mom is sick and like valid. You don't have to be like open to like when I've had a bad day, that's not the day where I like actively solicit feedback about like my haircut or YDS or whatever.
You know what? I think the humanness in all of this is that we're always open and we're always close. Like we move between those states all the time based on how we're feeling and what's going on. So if you have a bad day, it's normal to have that disposition of like, I don't have the emotional availability to take coaching feedback right now.
As an athlete myself, something I have been working on the last 5-ish years is asking myself honestly, am I looking for validation? Am I looking for help?
I feel like you're good at that, like distinguishing like, I need this and saying what you need.
I used to not be, and I would just cast a line looking for input that I didn't understand. So then when I got what was the wrong input, I would feel extremely upset and unsatisfied.
Yeah.
Until I learned to just say, TJ, I have this problem. Treat me like your wife, not your athlete. And it got better. And both of those things are legitimate needs, but I think it's important that we as athletes know which one we're actually looking for in any given moment and can articulate that. Because sometimes we might say we want feedback when actually we just want someone to tell us we're doing great. That's fine. If that's what you want all the time, that's an issue worth examining, but it's okay to have like a tough day or a tough race, a tough workout and be like, I kind of need a good game verbally on this one.
Totally. And I mean, that's the role of the coach, right? To be able to oscillate between supporter, cheerleader, accountability.
But we're not mind readers.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean,
fortunately,
you can, yeah, yes and no, right? Like it would make make our jobs easier if we knew what every athlete wanted all the time. But I think maybe that would take, at least for me, it would take some of the mystery and the fun out of the process. Like the genuine connection that you have to form in order to know your athletes is a really long-term process. And it's about like being in these moments of friction, like this coach is describing, and trying to, be okay there. And I love, I'm going to draw from this thing that you said last call, conditions of enoughness. What are your conditions of enoughness as a coach or an athlete? Like if you're hitting those, you're probably going to be more secure in some of these moments of ambiguity or friction that are a natural part of any relationship with another human being.
Yeah. And also, I think, again, as athletes, like if you're feeling defensive, that's good information. Communicate around that. And it's worth acknowledging that when your coach comments on, if your coach doesn't comment on something, that's not negligence, right? Like good coaching isn't the most coaching. Your coach pushing back also isn't punishment. A good coach is making judgment calls about what matters and what's noise. And those are very human judgment calls. What they're paying attention, and I think it's important to trust that we as coaches are paying attention even when we're quiet and we're not performing coaching, but we are communicating when it matters, which brings me to, I think, one of my more important points is that the problem with coaches is that they are humans. That's also the great thing about coaches.
Right.
We all make mistakes. That's not in and of itself a problem. Like, we're human, shit's gonna get fucked up. It is a problem if it happens repeatedly, consistently, and with no one taking responsibility. That's when it's really worth having a challenging conversation. Mistakes, that's normal. Someone not owning mistakes, someone repeatedly making mistakes with no effort to learn, that's a problem.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to our second listener question because it's a great segue for our main topic around fueling. Read this one, Zoe.
I've seen a lot of chatter online, Reddit, some blogs, that one guy at my running club claiming that high-carb fueling during races gives athletes diabetes.
Oh,
Hot take.
wow. Thought we weren't doing any hot or nots today.
This is a person wrote this to us. Is there any truth to this? Should I be worried about taking in 60 to 90 grams of carbs an hour or more when running?
Can I just come in with a short answer?
Give it to me.
No.
Yep.
This fear comes from conflating research, and a lot of it comes from sedentary populations. And so, all right, let's just take a step back and break this down. Let's debunk this.
Let's physiology this. So I think so there is evidence that eating sports nutrition, eating high carbs can be bad for teeth. This is documented. That's a thing. The difference between your teeth and your metabolism is that your teeth don't fundamentally change when you're running, but your metabolism does. So the key mechanism that debunks this is that when you're sitting on a couch eating sugar, glucose disposal depends heavily on insulin signaling. So chronic excess in that context can contribute to insulin resistance over time. The research here is solid. Big caveat for sedentary people. So but the important distinction here is that actively contracting muscles take up glucose at 50 to 100 times the rate of resting muscles. That is a fundamental shift in how they react. And here's an even more critical part: through pathways that are completely independent of insulin, that insulin resistance, operative part there. Muscle contraction itself drives GLUT4 translocation, which is the glucose transporter, via AMPK, calcium signaling, and other mechanisms that bypass the insulin receptor entirely. Again, this is a meaningfully different process. So when you're taking in 90 or more grams of carbs during a race, that glucose is being rapidly vacuumed and sucked up into working muscles through contraction-driven mechanisms. It's not sitting around in your bloodstream stressing your pancreas. It's being used pretty much immediately.
I want to comment a little bit on the training effect.
Yep.
And the training effect actually improves our glucose handling. So the more we train, the better we get at utilizing glucose.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important for athletes to recognize, especially those who are nervous about eating sugar.
Yep. Which is a lot of folks, and we will address this additionally.
Yes. So exercise training is the single most potent stimulus to increase your GLUT4 expression in muscles, and endurance athletes have enhanced capacity to handle glucose loads. And they also have better insulin sensitivity, improved glucose disposal. And, essentially, this is everything that we're doing here. All of your ability to do this is in opposition to getting diabetes.
That's correct.
If you're good at these things, you're not going to likely have diabetes. I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on that, but that's what the research points to.
Yes. So again, the context matters enormously. And I also think there's a risk comparison that matters, because on one side, we have the theoretical, poorly supported concern that race fueling, again, talking specifically about eating carbs during races, might contribute to metabolic dysfunction. we don't have, like, to be clear, there's not research showing that it's totally fine chronically either. We don't have research that says there's no downstream health impacts. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
We don't have documented research saying it leads to diabetes. And the things that lead to diabetes are different things than the things happening when you're running. Stands to reason, this is not the primary concern. On the other side, we have a well-documented, extensively researched risks of underfueling, low energy availability, relative energy deficiency in sport, stress fractures, hormonal dysfunction, immune suppression, performance decline. And those things are not the same. One has decades of mechanistic research and clinical evidence and hella peer-reviewed studies. The other one has bro science and blog posts where they're taking science from one population and extrapolating it to another. So, no, is my long answer. So, gotta bring my resting heart rate down. But I actually think this sets us up for what we're going to talk about today, which is nutrition mistakes that runners make and why we need to be critical of bad ideas, regardless of which camp or side they come from.
I think, as we segue into the 7 nutrition mistakes
There's
runners,
only 7.
There is only always 7 of a thing, which is why I gravitate towards that number. I don't know why it is. I'm just seeing
There's
it
7
everywhere.
Harry Potter books.
Just seeing it everywhere.
Lucky number 7 Horcruxes.
So, okay. All right. As we joke about it, I'm sure we'll find other mistakes.
My Horcruxes is a gel.
I just want to say nutrition is such a loaded topic.
Loaded.
It has like literally the worst signal to noise ratio in endurance sports of like all the topics we've talked about.
Yeah, I would say this, and the darkest corner of it, which is like weight loss bullshit.
So, we've got our low carb evangelicalists, we've got our high carb maximalists, we've got our clean eating purists out there, and we've got our supplement industry folks that profit from you being confused about all of this and want to sell you supplements and different protocols, all kind of like aligning in this, I would say, just this huge mess of noise, and it's really tough to find the signal. So hopefully, we can cut through that a little bit with the rest of this episode. And the frustrating part of all of this for me is the actual evidence base is pretty solid on the fundamentals around fueling.
We did the science.
Yeah, and they're not that fun. They're not that sexy.
Not sexy.
But as you've learned from hundreds of these podcasts, the best training often isn't the sexiest training you can do.
And good science is rarely very effective at moving product inventory.
So, let's dive in. Mistake number 1.
Yeah, so mistake number 1, and I feel pretty comfortable saying this is probably the biggest one.
Oh, boy.
And it's mostly the one that people who think, that ain't me, it you, girl. Girl meaning
Boy,
people of all
anybody.
genders. Any gender expression, you are girl to me. This is foundational. And if you're getting this wrong, nothing else matters. Turn the podcast off right now. The research framework is low energy availability, also known as LEA, which underpins relative energy deficiency in sport. The 2023 International Olympic Committee consensus update expanded this significantly from the old, outdated female athlete triad model, but this affects people regardless of sex, and that's really important because women tend to know when they're fucking up their nutrition in order to modify their body composition, because we're trained since birth to restrict our energy intake so that we can look like whatever bullshit model Instagram is trying to push at us. Men have a different. They have a different tightrope to walk, and there is evidence that their restriction shows up differently culturally and linguistically. So what is energy availability? It's the dietary energy intake minus exercise expenditure divided, by fat-free mass. That's a lot of math. But what's left over for physiological function after training? The threshold in the literature is around 30 kcal per kilogram of fat-free mass per day. Below that, systems downregulate. You don't need to understand that equation to know what it essentially means is if you're not eating enough to fuel your training, your body is going to freak the F out and start downregulating things.
And we don't want that because that's not really good for the adaptation process.
Or for life on Earth.
2003 study, a landmark study by Laux and Thuma, they found that we're going to have some challenges with our hormones, and upstream of your entire endocrine system, essentially, that whole process is going to be disrupted within 5 days of inadequate energy availability.
Five
So
days.
that's a really, really, really short timeline. This is going to be an acute issue rather than a chronic issue.
We are not here to fearmonger. And so let's just, emotions aside, the goal is not to like freak people out. It is also worth acknowledging that the margin for error here isn't huge, particularly with female athletes. We can see in the evidence that even a within day energy deficit, not 5 days, 1 day's energy deficit in female athletes diminishes their bone, it increases the risk of bone stress injury. It increases the risk of metabolic and hormonal dysfunction. There's even evidence that if female athletes are meeting their overall energy needs, but don't have sufficient carbohydrate intake, you can have similar results. So, again, not here to freak people out or to fearmonger, but to approach with evidence and neutrality that this stuff needs to be taken seriously. And mistakes made in a smaller window of time, if not addressed, can really quickly lead to a pretty negative cascade for athletes. So, how this works mechanistically is that your body monitors energy status through leptin, insulin, IGF-1, thyroid hormones. When the signal is not enough, you get coordinated down regulation. Reproductive function is typically what goes first because it's metabolically expensive but not survival critical. That's why amenorrhea is a big part of the model. Then bone metabolism. That's the second thing. Yikes. Immune function, protein synthesis, and cardiovascular function. If you get, like, a lot of times athletes won't address it till it gets to the cardiovascular bit because that's where they start to really see the performance declines. But like the second you experience reproductive function disruption, get at it.
A couple practical, signs, manifestations of some of these issues taking shape are persistent fatigue that doesn't respond to rest, increased injuries, especially stress fractures, menstrual dysfunction, feeling cold, frequent illness, mood disruptions and disturbances, and paradoxically, performance stagnation. So, despite training hard, we can train, and our performance still stagnates. We're not getting better. We're not seeing those gains. We're going to races. We're not having the output levels that we want. And just this general sense of like the body can't adapt because we're in conservation mode.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note this isn't just an eating disorder issue. Unintentional underfueling from high training loads plus inadequate intake produces the same physiological outcomes as intentional restriction. Your body doesn't care about whatever your brain is trying to do. The physiological impact will be much the same. So I think for,
Oh,
again, two camps here of like, if this is a mental issue, you need to get to the root of that. And if it's a knowledge gap issue, again, you need to get to the root of that, and addressing those two separate, sometimes intertwined, and coexisting sort of underpinnings of underfueling are important to assess and address in a separate, educated way.
I think it's important to note that 20 to 60% of endurance athletes are in some way, shape, or form dealing with some kind of underfueling.
Yeah.
And that is a huge part of the population. And I do want to give a shout out to, our male identifying runners out there, because we often have a different language for all of this. And it's like, I have a paleo diet, or I'm vegan, or I eat clean, or I don't eat processed foods. And we use that as a disguise for our restrictive eating and habits that don't actually support our training and undermine it. So if that sounds like you, shoot me an email. Let's talk about it a little bit and raise some awareness there and see what we can do to get you, fueling adequately. Because that's something that I see a lot in my coaching.
It's underdiagnosed and underrecognized in men, which I think is really important as coaches and athletes to draw attention to, is that, like, again, we have a pretty solid cultural awareness this is an issue for women, but it is for everyone. It looks different, and the solutions are also going to be a little bit different.
All right. Mistake number 2, getting seduced by metabolic flexibility claims.
Yeah, I would call this the Insta bro mistake. And the challenge with this is there is a kernel of legitimate science here that's been distorted into something that doesn't hold up. So the claim is that you train your body to oxidize fat, spare glycogen, unlock unlimited energy. So that's theoretically pretty appealing because your fat stores are essentially unlimited while glycogen caps at around 2,000 calories.
The most cited study here is Burke et al. 2017, Supernova.
The study that launched 1,000 bro scientists.
This study looked at elite race walkers for 3 weeks, randomized to high carb, periodized carb, or low carb, high fat ketogenic diet. And the low carb group did increase fat oxidation. That part is confirmed by these studies, but their exercise economy at race pace worsened.
Uh-oh.
More oxygen required for the same pace.
Not
great.
ideal.
Performance improvements seen in other groups weren't replicated. I think that's really important to note, too.
And there's limitations on this study that I think are worth bringing into account because it's 3 weeks only looking at highly trained athletes, intensified training. And so oftentimes fat adaptation advocates argue full adaptation takes longer. That's legitimate. But my counter critique would be is we don't have good long-term controlled trials showing performance benefits in trained athletes. And there are downsides to this purported theoretical metabolic upside.
I think we do have a lot of interesting N of 1 storytellers out there in the space talking
Very
about
effective.
how I've been successful with this and therefore you could be too. And I don't know, I feel like that really rubs me the wrong way.
Well,
It's
because
what
the
works
plural
for
of
me,
anecdote isn't data.
right? It's like what works for me will certainly work for you. It's like not necessarily. Maybe the process in which I figured out what fueling works for me could be a process in which you figure out what fueling works for you, and that's helpful to hear. But the end result may not be the same thing as that we are going to be on these restrictive diets or not having carbs or whatever.
Yeah. So my final thought is I would love to see additional robust discussion, additional robust research. But my primary concern is that the metabolic flexibility narrative has become a Trojan horse for underfueling. It provides a scientific sounding justification for restriction. It's not, I'm underfueling, it's I'm training my metabolism, I'm biohacking, I'm training fasted.
Right.
And sports dietitians like our colleague Kylie, who, if you're looking for support in this stuff, I would 900% recommend her, never found clinical reason to advocate for low carb in active populations. Again, there will always be individual variability. We're talking at the population level, not because they're anti-fat, but because that risk benefit doesn't make sense when LEA is already so prevalent in these populations.
All right. Mistake number 3, never training your gut.
Never have I ever.
So one of the most actionable findings in sports nutrition research is right here. Gut function during exercise is adaptable. It's not fixed. So where you are right now, if you're like, I can't do more than 60 grams of carbs an hour. Okay, with the proper training, you likely could.
Absolutely. So, okay, one resource I would recommend if you're a freak like me and love this stuff is Asker Jukendorp's website, which is mysportscience.com. It's amazing. And he's an actual scientist, researcher, not selling a weird gel made out of European honey, and he writes about the stuff in a way that I think is pretty easy to understand and makes ballin' infographics. But his lab was kind of the first to establish this, so shout out to you, Asker. And this rate limiting step for carbohydrate absorption isn't gastric emptying. It's the transport protein density in the small intestine, the SGLT1, which transports glucose, and the GLUT5, which transports fructose. Those are saturable with maximum capacity. And that capacity is plastic. There was a 2010 study on cyclists who found that those who consistently practiced high carbohydrate intake during training increased their exogenous carbohydrate Oxidation rates. They absorbed more, they used more. The gut adapted. It is trainable just like a muscle.
So mechanically, what's going on here? You're up regulating transporter expression in enterocytes.
Enterocytes.
Enterocytes. Thank you, Zoe. I love it when you're able to step in with those really sciencey words. So essentially, more doors for sugar. There's going to be more doors for sugar to get through when we trained our gut. So you're going to be able to utilize more carbohydrate more efficiently the more you train it. Those doors, they become bigger. There's more of them. Therefore, we can use the carbohydrate more efficiently. But it does take consistent exposure over weeks.
Weeks.
Yeah. So not the weekend before your race, not 2 weekends before your race. We're advocating for our athletes to, be training their gut all year round. And especially, in the 8 to 12 weeks before a race.
Yeah, the practical implication here is that a lot of times GI distress during racing often isn't a sensitive stomach. It's an untrained gut being asked to do something it just hasn't practiced. The runner who does fasted long runs and then tries to do 60 grams an hour on race day shouldn't be surprised. Likewise, the folks who try to eat like a protein bar or like dates and honey and then try to like fuel with sports nutrition on race day, that's not going to work. You need to use the thing that you're actually fueling with. That's really important. And research consistently shows athletes who practice race nutrition in training report fewer GI symptoms during competition. So again, like if at first you don't succeed, try again. If you get the sense that like this is genuinely making me ill and I immediately like poop my pants, that's also data. But just like the thing of like, it didn't sit in my stomach great right away. I think that can be an indication we might want to continue exploring, maybe try a different flavor, a different texture. But I think that a lot of times people give up on sports nutrition that would otherwise really benefit them just because they try it once and they're like, it didn't feel great. Of course it didn't.
Yeah. Test a bunch of different things in order to figure out what really works well for you. All right. Mistake number 4, skipping fuel and ignoring hydration.
Yes.
Such a classic mistake.
Yep. So, there's this foundational recommendation 30 to 60 grams of carbs an hour for events lasting 1 to 3 hours, large evidence base showing performance benefits versus placebo, even again skewing depending on the event and your output, individual variability. That's 60 to 90 grams an hour. The physiology is this: exogenous glucose oxidized by working muscles, how much carbohydrate you're actually using, sparing glycogen stores, maintaining blood glucose for muscles and central nervous system. The brain accounts for 20% of resting metabolic rate, so bonking is partly central fatigue from inadequate glucose delivery.
A couple common mistakes: 2+ hour long runs with nothing or just 1 or 2 gels. Racing marathons below 30 grams of carbs an hour.
Nope.
Waiting until you're depleted to start fueling or hydrating. So in all of these scenarios, we're already going to be behind the 8 ball.
So this is another part of like if athletes are struggling with the fueling piece, hydration plays a really important role because SGLT1 is a sodium glucose contransporter. The sodium gradient drives glucose uptake. Essentially, sodium helps open those doors that the carbohydrates can go through.
Yeah.
If you're significantly sodium depleted, you're going to have compromised carbohydrate absorption. Likewise, if you overdo it on sodium, that's going to impact your gut osmolality and you are going to need a fresh pair of shorts. That's why oral rehydration solutions often contain both glucose and sodium because those things work synergistically. And if something in your nutrition plan with like the sports nutrition or the food component isn't gelling, pun intended, that's when it might be time to look at your sodium intake, do a sweat test, and dial in your hydration as a holistic part of that fueling plan.
Yeah, I do want to mention here that during exercise, blood moves away from our GI system.
Yep.
And it goes towards our muscles, those things that are actually working to keep us going. And so dehydration actually makes this worse.
Yeah.
So a dehydrated gut is slower, and we're going to have delayed gastric emptying and reduced absorption in these situations. So if you're having GI distress in nutrition, looks reasonable, you really need to examine that hydration. How do we move blood back into the GI system in order to assimilate, the carbohydrates that we're taking in, it is really a two-part process. You can't have one without the other. But often what I do see in coaching is athletes really nailing their their carbs an hour and wondering why they're still throwing up and saying it's
Yeah.
because I'm eating too much. Really getting 60 grams and nailing it and wondering why they're bloated. Getting, all their carbs in and it's like, well, have you done a sodium sweat test?
Yeah.
Do you know for sure that you need 2,000 milligrams of sodium an hour? That sounds like a lot. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm a really salty sweater. Have you done a test? No.
Seeing salt on your clothes doesn't mean shit, guys. You need to get a sweat test. We recommend Levelin. We don't make money from them. We just think their test is easy to use and accurate. And it's important to acknowledge that sweat sodium losses are extremely individually variable. And this is one area where the praxis and the research aren't totally
Yeah.
meshed, because what we see in practice is that individual variability ranges from 200 milligrams of sodium losses per hour upwards of 2,000 milligrams. That's a huge amount of variability that you can't account for in these generic sodium recommendations. So figuring out your specific profile is going to be huge.
All right. Mistake number 5, the clean eating performance trap.
Yeah, this one is
Deep
tough.
breath here. Deep breath, Zoe. Deep
I'm
breath.
regulated. I had my Pringles. I will actually say a thing that I have shifted. I always like to acknowledge things I've changed my mind on, things I've maybe been wrong about or have approached less usefully in the past.
I feel like you're stealing my personal story here.
We both love changing our minds. We're both open. It's important to acknowledge, like, again, as coaches, there can be some pressure of like, I've always been right. Well, even better than always being right is getting right.
Gosh.
Getting to be right.
This whole clean eating thing just sounds like me 6 years ago, though.
Yes. Well, so here, Kylie has helped me understand that simply yelling at people to eat more is not effective.
Doesn't
and really
help?
trying to
Eat a
approach
cheeseburger?
with, yes, telling people to eat a cheeseburger doesn't actually help because it doesn't stay curious about what the actual impediment to their proper fueling might be. And
Yeah.
so here is where I'm going to humbly submit myself and say this can be one of the reasons that folks underfuel. And it really behooves us as practitioners, coaches,
Right.
athletes, humans in the world to be curious
It's not the
about
only reason.
the why behind athletes fueling. And like, if they're not eating enough, really being curious about what the impediments are.
So I like the irony in this clean eating performance trap because dietary patterns that are health promoting in daily life can work against you during exercise. And that's take a deep breath, take that in. I'm trying to take that in as a clean eater in recovery. During exercise at higher
So
intensity.
I had gone in, I've been in treatment for an eating disorder and the orthorexia, the
Yeah.
obsession with the purity, perceived cleanliness of your food is not recognized by the DSM. It is a heuristic that impacts a lot of folks in the space because people are interested in health. They are interested in diet. They want to nourish their body well. And when you marry that with the type A mentality of many performance athletes, on the other end, you can take a really good faith concern in health and well-being, and it comes out the other end of a control freak in some pretty toxic ways.
And that can be really tough in a performance setting, especially considering that 80% of the blood flow to your gut is compromised during higher intensities. So then asking your gut to like digest fiber or your homemade you know I'm thinking about those balls that just look like they're dark.
Oh, yeah, the
and
energy balls.
those energy balls that just look like they've got a lot of nuts in them.
It literally looks like gremlin balls.
Yeah, I mean, you're just asking yourself to have a GI disaster
a
by
lot of work.
trying to metabolize that. Like that's really difficult to metabolize when the blood flow to your gut is compromised by up to 80%. And I think it's important to recognize that research on GI distress during endurance exercise consistently identifies fiber, fat, and protein as risk factors for GI distress. Same, those macronutrients that we often emphasize in our daily life, they're really good for us. They help with recovery and all of these, important things. They're not helpful when we're, trying to, run a marathon.
Mhm. I would also, the way I like athletes to think about this, and if it's tough for you to think about, probably consulting with an expert who is not just some gal on the internet and addressing the mental component, addressing the nutrition component with a properly credentialed
Yeah.
person, but thinking of concentric circles. And in the middle, there's the sort of performance orientation, and the outer circle is health and well being. You can't have that performance orientation without nailing down the overall health and well being. And if your diet is so insane that you can't go to birthday parties, that you can't eat out, that you have to meal prep for 11 hours every Sunday, that you have anxiety anytime you travel or you're not totally in control of your food, that you are spinning out whenever you don't hit your macros or you're following some like insane, really pre-prescribed thing. Remember that health takes into account your social health. It takes into account your mental health. And those aren't just like me getting my like Marianne Williamson be here now on. Those things are critical. I mean, A, you should care about them because you want to thrive as a person, but B, they are also fundamental to your performance if that language is more resonant for you. Pick and choose the human, the performance, the thriving, whatever matters. You need to be cool with your diet. And a lot of times we see athletes get interested in diet and interested in nutrition, and they go down this rabbit hole of trying to clean up their diet to feel better. So they start cutting foods out, and then they don't feel better because they're not eating enough. And then their solution is inherently to cut more out to feel better or to do more training to counterbalance their negative feelings that they have around food. And that is never the answer. The answer is something more complicated than we can reasonably give airtime to. But this is just where we say a big no dog to clean eating.
Yeah. And let's just talk about simple carbs for a second
My
here,
bestie.
which also like they often get this, like they get kind of painted in this bad light of not being clean enough. Um, Glucose, fructose, maltodextrin.
RFK literally said sugar is poison. So that's super cool and normal.
He's probably not running a marathon
He's
anytime
not.
soon. Um, these three types of carbohydrates absorb rapidly with minimal digestive demand. They empty fast, they transit efficiently, they provide near immediate fuel for you when you're training. And this is why sports nutrition products are formulated with these simple carbohydrates. It's applied uh, for your physiology. That's not some kind of conspiracy. They're not out there trying to get you addicted to sugar. They're trying to help you perform well based on the science. I do think there's a little bit of context here for our ultra runners specifically, are do use a combination of sports products and whole foods. Something Kylie continually reminds me is that athletes in these longer endurance events, i.e., more than 6 hours, typically have less GI distress if they mix in some solid foods or some whole food options. Some small amounts of protein can be helpful late in races. And so there is some complexity here, but the foundation of it is that continual inflow of carbohydrate into the system.
Yeah, so nutrition is a specific tool for a specific context. Make sure you meet your energy needs. Again, that's a big baseline concern here. And if you're eating according to a heuristic that makes that challenging, it's worth examining that with someone who is smarter than me.
Mistake number 6, copying elite athlete protocols without the context.
I love this one because it is nuanced, and I love seeing conversation around high carb fueling because I do like seeing a counterbalance to the narrative of restriction and diminishing carbohydrates. But I think that in some ways, the current discourse has swung too far towards more is always inherently better without attention to context.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. And I think we see this a lot with our like high carb fueling. High carb means somewhere between 90 and 120 grams of carbs an hour. We don't have that much research actually to support 120 grams of carbs for runners. We do have some research on elite marathoners who are doing 120 grams of carbs an hour. And yes,
We
there
have
are some.
anecdotal evidence, but not like published studies looking at many of the concerns we have.
There are some studies that I have seen on some of the positive benefits of doing that, especially when it comes to muscle damage.
Yeah.
But these are elite marathoners. I don't think any of those studies had men. I could be
Women.
wrong. Excuse me, women. I could be wrong.
My God, it'd be amazing if you looked at a study, you're like, oh my God, there's no men.
Right. There's no dudes in this study. Wow.
They only studied the Real Housewives. This is sick.
But I do think, it's important to recognize, like, these are very, very small studies. They're done on elite athletes, not amateur runners. And there's a huge spectrum between 90 and 120 grams of carbs an hour. And there is just kind of a little too much going on in the Instagram, YouTube space around 120 grams of carbs an hour for me to feel comfortable
right because
now.
context really matters, and online discourse always strips everything of the important nuance and context, because one of the key variables here is intensity. Carbohydrate oxidation is intensity dependent, so at low intensities fat handles more energy demand. So an elite athlete running a 2:05 marathon is at a very high percentage of their threshold. That's an enormous carb burn rate. Someone running a 4:30 is at a fundamentally different intensity with different fuel kinetics. So, if you're, practically speaking, if you're running a 13-minute mile and that's like 40 to 50% of your threshold, your carb oxidation is going to be lower. If you're taking in 90 to 120 grams of carbohydrates an hour, that means potentially ingesting more than you can oxidize. Excess goes somewhere. Oftentimes, that's where we see the GI distress with higher levels of fueling. Again, I think it's worth experimenting, taking into context your individual variability, frame size, the demands of your event. So I think that a lot of times high intake rates in the research that we see are in athletes who've also really specifically trained their guts. And if you haven't done that work, your transporter expression will not support those rates, regardless of whatever Jim Walmsley is currently doing. So the principle here, I think, is you need to fuel for your intensity, your duration, your trained gut capacity, what you've tested in your training, and what you have determined feels good for you. For most recreational runners, that's not going to be 120 grams an hour. For some, it might be. What I'm saying here is be skeptical of anyone who tells you exactly what you should be doing. Should be high, should be low. We are saying question it and figure out what you specifically need as an individual, depending on what event you're doing, your current level of fitness. But the Kipchoge does 100 grams an hour, so I should too, is a category error.
All right. Number 7 here.
Frameworks before marginal gains.
And I think this is where the rubber should be meeting the road.
Yes.
But often doesn't.
So this is sort of like the parting thoughts that I want to leave athletes with, is before adopting any new nutrition intervention, and this goes for all of the things we have told you today, apply this framework to us. Like, our goal is not to develop a weird nutrition cult of personality around ourselves.
Right.
We want to train people to think critically. And if you're doing that well, that means likely we will make a mistake and you will get to call us on that. And I will celebrate that process as long as it's on a good day for me. If I'm having a good hair day, I can take it. If I'm not, God bless us.
As long as you're feeling open and
as long as I'm
confident.
feeling open and confident. So when looking at these interventions, it's important to see who was studied. Elite athletes with 15 plus years of training, or are they people like you? Effect sizes in highly trained populations don't always transfer to amateurs, and sometimes interventions that help elites are irrelevant or even counterproductive for folks who haven't mastered the basics.
Right.
Again, you don't need to be getting all in the weeds about periodizing your carbohydrate intake if you're not meeting your energy needs.
And I think that's what this leads us to, is, have I mastered my prerequisites? The hierarchy exists for a reason. Do we have our level 1 training priorities nailed? Are we getting our daily fueling needs met? Do we have energy availability? Are we sleeping well? Are we consistently training? It's hard to move on to level 2, 3, or even be in level 4, which might have, high carb optimization, 120 grams of carbs per hour. It's hard to be there if you're not even sleeping well or getting in the fueling you need day to day to support your training and, the intensity you have there, how, like, all of that. Start with the basics and then work your way up over time. Um, Third, who benefits financially?
This is important.
I think it's really important to follow the money. Supplement companies have huge incentives to convince you to buy their products. They love to fund studies that have results that tell you that their products are great. But that doesn't necessarily mean those products are helpful for you. They may not be useless, but we need to be skeptical about these things.
For instance, I'm petty and I guess I have too much time on my hands when I'm not running 100 miles a week.
Uh-oh, here we go.
But when you go to the AG1 website, they have a thing that's like science backed. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. So I clicked on the asterisk that takes you to a study, and they put AG1 in a simulated gut. Not even a real
Not
human.
even a real gut?
In a fake gut. And they were like, works like a dream, folks. So, a lot of times it doesn't take like a fucking tinfoil hat, red thread situation to see where the money goes. It's like 2 clicks and your question is answered. There is nothing on earth besides like eating enough, getting sleep, managing stress, doing your training, no supplement, no intervention, no protocol that's going to like transform shit for you. It's so tempting and appealing to think that there is. I would love to have a podcast that reveals the secret to whatever, but we don't have it and it doesn't exist.
Train with me for 10 years.
And then we'll tell you the secret.
Yes. All right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're going to have all the studies referenced in our show notes, and share this with a friend. Join our community as a podcast listener. You can get involved with our Foothills coaching program, which includes one-on-one time with coaches, twice monthly coaching roundtables, and access to, a lot of folks who are along in this journey with us. $10 a month. Use code Foothills10 at checkout, microcosm-coaching.com. And as always, email us. We'd love to hear from you, microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. See you soon.